I've summoned them from their graves, and now I'm among them.
Hello and welcome to another bad movie review. This time we're looking at Terror Creatures from the Grave. This is a 1965 Italian horror film, originally titled Five Tombe per un Medium. That was the worst Italian I've done in a while, but here we are. So this runs about an hour and 25 minutes, and I really hope there is a longer version of this film out there because it seems like there might have been a few things left out. Now this was directed by Maximo Pupillo, whose work horror film fans may recognize from Bloody Pit of Horror that came out the same year. And Western film fans may recognize him from The Django Kills Softly, because he was the director on both of those. Seems like he only directed about 9 movies before he passed away in 1999, and the majority of his work seems to have been in the 60s. This stars Barbara Steele, who is pretty much a legend in Italian horror film circles. She has done a lot of other work as well, but primarily she seems to be known for her work in horror, including Piranha and Black Sunday, but she was an extra in the 39 Steps and on an episode of Alfred Hitchcock Presents, so she's been in a lot of stuff, and likely because of that she will be recognizable to longtime cinemaphiles that actually have a diversity of films under their belt. Now in this movie she plays Cleo Hoff, whose husband had died a year ago, but for some reason somebody sent a mysterious letter to his lawyers, seemingly written by this dead man, and that is when we meet Albert Kovac, who is a lawyer played by Walter Brandi. In English translations his name is Walter Brandt, and he has come to settle the will. When he arrives he is confronted by the fact that he didn't know that this man that he's supposed to talk to has been dead for almost a year, and nobody bothered to inform the lawyers, but also the wife and daughter are there, and this is clearly his second wife because she's almost the same age as his daughter, but the handwriting on the letter they do verify is the dead man's, so they're very confused. Well, there's something wrong with his automobile, so he can't go back quite yet, and of course nobody in town's gonna be able to repair it, especially tonight, so he's kind of stuck at the mansion, and they suggest that he stay for a day or two while they try and figure all this out. He's given a brief tour of the estate, and it turns out at one point this villa may have been a plague hospital or built on a plague hospital. That seems to vary slightly throughout the movie. And the daughter, Corinne, suggests there's something supernatural afoot, and she doesn't seem to entirely trust her stepmother either. But in the middle of the night, Corinne screams out, claiming she saw her father. There are some really good lines in this film when it comes to stuff like that, so the dialogue is often actually pretty fun. And it's pretty obvious that the daughter is into a bit more of the occultist slash spiritualist side of things, and her father was real big into the occult, which did not win him any favors in town. Although he did seem to be fairly popular at one point in the town, a lot of people were not very thrilled about his occult interests. I know, I'm shocked too. In heavily Catholic Italy, there wasn't a big call for occultists. And that's around the time we start to learn some secrets. We meet a doctor by the name of Nemec, played by Alfredo Rizzo, and he gives Albert a ride into town, and that's where we meet Oscar Stimmel. Stimmel warns Corinne not to stay at the villa, and he tries to dissuade Albert as well, but that's really going nowhere because, I mean, who doesn't want to stay at a plague hospital where they have a display of hands of people that were plague spreaders? Because apparently during the plague there were some people that really wanted to spread the plague once they got it, and then they had their hands cut off before they were burned or killed. Yeah, exciting times during the plague. When they go to meet the mayor slash pharmacist of the town, Piero, he is found dead, and although they say it's cardiac arrest, that seems to be the doctor's favorite excuse for murder around here. It's pretty obvious that this was no accident. The corpse has a terrified look on him, and the positioning is a bit unnatural, and Albert's like, yeah, there's something weird going on here. And when they're at the county clerk, I guess the Italian equivalent, they meet a town archivist who also says there's some weird stuff going on. And he mentions the corpse collector's cart, and that's a theme that is mentioned a few times, and we hear it once later on, but it's a little inconsistent. Apparently it's a superstition where you would hear this corpse cart pass 3 times, and if that happens, then somebody's gonna die, probably you. So if you hear that, you may want to look out for supernatural enemies. And to the archivist, that was the sign that the mayor was gonna die, and that's when we learned from the clerk/archivist that there were 5 witnesses to Geronimus's death, and it's been almost exactly 1 year. Now, Cleo had mentioned that she's only in town for a few days because they're going to move the body from the grave to some other location in the south of Italy or whatever where they're living now, and that plays a part in what's going on as well. But the mayor marks the 3rd death of the original 5 that allegedly witnessed the death of Geronimus. We then get a really boring voiceover, which is incredibly lazy in a movie, and it sounds like a bad 1950s episode of Dragnet. Comes off as just kind of dated, where they just spew some facts for you so they don't have to show you because they didn't have time or money to film it or whatever the reason. So I kind of blanked out on that. I don't really remember what was said. Well, Albert had found this old Edison wax cylinder phonograph that he was playing with, and we got this really cool, creepy recording from the dead guy. And when he goes to listen to it again, it's a recording of somebody singing a lullaby, which sounds very plague related. And it does have kind of a Evil Dead vibe to this film in a way, because some of the scenes are very reminiscent of that. You've got the weird lullaby going on, you've got some creepiness out in the woods, you've got the dead guys recording. There are some elements here that look like they may have helped inspire Evil Dead, but it's probably just a coincidence. Still, the lullaby thing is pretty creepy, and it does come into play later on because they do link it into the storyline, and it's not subtle at all. I think that lullaby could have been used to a much creepier effect than it was, but it does look like this film was a little bit rushed, unfortunately. Shockingly, we do get a little bit of mild gore when one of the signatories was killed, and that's pretty surprising for a black and white film. You don't get a lot of gore, but you see some intestines here from somebody that gets impaled, and that is really, really rare, but Italian horror films are notorious for that. Unfortunately, at this time, that's not the case. So this is definitely something that horror movie fans should be aware of, that this is not something you would have seen in American cinema in the mid-60s. This is something that would have come later on in much more prevalent ways. But for the time, this was actually a fairly shocking scene to see intestines on the screen, even as mild as this scene is. We do learn the identity of the 5th witness and the fact that there is actually a 6th witness when suddenly the plague starts outbreaking for no apparent reason, and one of the loyal minions of the evildoer is given the plague for reasons. The last 20 minutes of this film are just rushed. Some of it doesn't make a whole lot of sense because a lot of stuff is going on, and I guess you're supposed to be like, oh my gosh, it's getting crazy in here, when it's really just confusing and a little off-putting. So it went from this slow build-up horror to really rushed crazy stuff. Now, I don't want you to get the idea that you're gonna see a siege on the house by plague victims, which would be awesome because there are supposed to be terror creatures from beyond the grave. But yeah, that isn't really gonna happen here. You never actually see the terror creatures from the grave. You just see a couple of people catch the plague, and it's super spreader plague because people die within minutes of getting it. And the creatures that were supposed to come out of the grave, they're all off camera. I think you see one hand, that's about it. Everybody else is in shadows or inferred. So it's sort of the Deadite effect in Evil Dead, where you get the camera perspective of it running around and people reacting to it, but they don't actually show you anything. There's a lot of that in the ending of this film. The last 20 minutes are such a massive letdown. This movie could have been great. They just had to throw some bad makeup on some zombies, and that That would have been amazing. But all the people that get the super plague here die almost immediately and they don't come back. They just lay there dead, plague filled. And by plague filled, I mean they just have some crappy makeup on. But that makeup apparently was very limited. So you just get like the shadow of a crewman going like boo, and people responding to that occasionally. So that was exciting. People you didn't expect to die do die though, and you get kind of a predictable horror movie ending, which I thought was a little disappointing. A lot of the story beats are pretty predictable as well. You can tell who's doing what with who through the majority of the film, and there are some sort of last minute additions to the plot where somebody shows up and now they're involved even though they weren't really referenced before beyond somebody mentioning their name, and that was about it. There's no real build up to them being victims of anything. It just sort of happens. I think the script definitely needed some work, and it really does suffer from not setting up scenes very well, but there are some cool elements to the film. It just has a very predictable 60s horror film feel to it. I think if they had taken the storyline and remade this in the 80s, it could have been a much more memorable film. Having done this with an American studio in the 70s or 80s, it could have been a classic, but instead it ends up being a little bit ham-fisted in the wrong places and story elements that seem a little out of place and a little rushed when they could have been in there the entire time. And this movie also suffers from a lot of almost nudity, which is really frustratingly stupid. Either show us the goods or don't. There's no plots in here, and that was a little bit frustrating, especially for an Italian film. You expect a little bit better on that front. So we never see the plague monsters or the supposed terror creatures from the grave. They're all just shadows and implied being there. Evil Dead made great use of a limited budget and limited extras and camera work, and they turned it into something memorable. This movie does the opposite, where they waste the potential of the film by seeing the limitations there and just rolling their eyes at them. Instead of trying to be innovative and creative, they got lazy, and it shows. In the end of the movie, you're gonna watch it and be like, that kills the bad guys? Seriously? Because the way the bad guys that we don't even see get killed is almost as bad as the twist in the happening. It is almost insulting to the viewer. So I will recommend watching this from a B-movie enjoyment standpoint if you really like B-movies, because there are some really cool elements here, and the core story idea is good. It's a good revenge tale. It's just executed very poorly at the end. They really seem to have rushed this film in way too many spots. But there was a good idea here that probably could be redone very easily, and in some ways it has inspired better movies. But unfortunately, this is not the best film for the actors that they had. The English dubbing is really well done, and you can tell that this movie was not even popular with the director because he took his name off it and allowed Ralph Zucker, who was the producer, to take the director credit, even though Zucker didn't direct any scenes at all in this film. So that kind of tells you what the director thought of it, but I think that that's a little unfair. It is a very flawed movie, but definitely not the worst I've ever seen, even out of the 60s. Overall, the English overlays are pretty solidly done. There is some decent actors in here. I just think the movie has quite a few flaws that are comical at times and a little insulting to the audience at times. So if you like sitting and watching cheesy B films, you'll probably get something out of this, but it's definitely not going to be for everyone, especially if you're looking for an actual horror film. This has some elements of horror, but it's all very, very dated and stereotypical for the 60s. There's nothing innovative here, but there are ideas that can inspire better ideas down the road. Like I said, there are some parallels to Evil Dead in here in regards to various limitations that the films have that Evil Dead did a better job making use of. You've got the creepy recordings, you've got people running around in the woods, you've got people seeing like ghosts and stuff like that. Even though you don't see the ghost, they do, and they respond accordingly. But there are way too many flaws for this movie to be a classic or to be even a highly recommended B film. But if you're a film student, there's a lot you could learn from this film as to what not to do and how not to panic when you have a limited budget. So definitely not for mainstream audiences, but worth a view for the diehards. That's gonna do it for this episode. Thank you so much for listening and supporting the channel. If you enjoyed the episode, please hit the like button, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss future reviews. If you'd like to help the channel out in other ways, links are in the description to various support methods. And as always, we hope to see you on the next one.